These are Delaware, or as they referred to themselves, Lenape. They have a story. It begins with the Walam Olum. The Walam Olum is a chronicle of their history. We have a copy of the Walam Olum in the Madison County, Museum of Madison County's library. I've looked through it. It's a big, thick book, but I looked through it to acquaint myself with it. A little information about it. It's the tribal chronicle of the Lenape, or Delaware Indians. The songs relate to the tribal story from the creation to the coming of the white man to North America. It's divided into 5 books or songs, as it's said, and each made up of varying numbers of verses. The main themes are the migration from Asia to Alaska and south and east across the North American continent. The story was kept from generation to generation by pictorial symbols painted on sticks and kept in order by bundles. Each symbol or pictograph represented a verse of the chronicle. None of the sticks survive today. Copies of the pictographs, as well as the Delaware text to accompany them, do. Authenticity is controversial about it. Historians have looked at it, and some things there is some doubt about, but it is what it is. Their story, like all Native American tribes, both North and South America, begins with the crossing of the Bering Strait. Our Native Americans had their beginnings in Asia. This story of the Walam Olum picks them up as they enter the United States, or what we know as Alaska, and they make their way across North America. For a number of years, centuries that is, they settled in the northwest part of what is today the United States, the Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana area. And then they began to move eastward, conquering as they went, successfully conquering until they got to the Mississippi River. And there they ran into the Huron Nation. And the Huron Nation were fierce fighters. And, but in time, the Lenape conquered the Huron, and they moved all the way to America's east coast, to the eastern Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware area, and there they resided for centuries. They were known by other tribes all throughout North America as the grandfather tribe. They're the only tribe with that distinction, a distinction of honor. All other North American tribes call the Delaware the grandfather tribe out of respect for them. It was while they were here in the early 1600s that a man by the name of Lord Delaware, an English aristocrat, was given lands by the King of England here in North America, and so he sent ships to North America to explore his newfound land, and he sailed up, the ship sailed up a river which they named the Delaware, after Lord Delaware, and settled along the shores of the Delaware were Native Americans, and they gave them the name Delaware. In time, as the area began to be settled and populated, the Delaware and all of the other tribes began to be pushed westward into middle Pennsylvania, and finally into Ohio, into western Ohio, and that's where our story picks up. At a place where there is much white earth. I will explain that to you in just a moment. First of all, though, I do want to acknowledge the Anderson television station folks that are here. They are providing a valuable service. I didn't realize how valuable until I got an email just a couple weeks ago, and I'll bring that into the story as we go along. and you will understand just how important our sessions are across the United States. The Delaware Indian Village sites along the White River in central Indiana, 1795 to 1821. It begins with the Treaty of Greenville in Ohio in 1795. This was a treaty to end the western wars of western Ohio that the Native Americans had been putting upon the settlers in Ohio. They were brought to treaty here at the fort at Greenville, Ohio. This is Little Turtle. There's one Delaware in this picture right here. His name is Bakangahilas. He is the war chief of the Delaware. Others in the group are Lewis and Clark. This is General Anthony Wayne. By that treaty, the tribes in western Ohio ceded claim to those lands, and they were moved westward, many of them into what was known as the dark and foreboding land called Indiana. The exact date of the first appearance of the Delaware tribe in central Indiana is estimated to be 1794. They came at the invitation of the Miami tribe, who had occupied the lands of north central Indiana since 1750. At this treaty at Greenville, the Miami said to the Delaware, "You may come and live along the White River, which is part of our lands." That was okay with the federal government, because the federal government really had no idea in mind as to where to place the Indians. They just wanted them out of Ohio. So with this invitation by the Miami to come here to central Indiana, the federal government was okay with that. I think the Miami had an ulterior motive. I think the Miami looked to the Ohio River and saw the people who were coming over the mountains from the colonies to begin to settle, many of them settling in what is today southern Indiana, and beginning to move north. And the Miami invited the Delaware to be between them as a buffer. That's a theory of mine, but I think it's supported by a lot of evidence. The United States considered the Miami to have a legitimate claim to the lands in the Wabash draining system in Indiana Territory, and they offered no objection when the Miami invited the Delaware. In traditional Indian fashion, there had been only an oral agreement permitting the move, but no written record. The sites they selected were the well-watered country along the West Fork of the White River, with such tributaries as Duck Creek, Pipe Creek, Killbuck Creek, and Buck Creek. And here you see a very busy map of the White River and the settlement of the Delaware along that, and all of these streams that I just mentioned feeding that. A little bit clearer for you to see is a map. This was drawn by the Connors, John and William Connor. And what it was to show was John Connor's trading post at Brookville and his brother William Connor's post here. You know it as Connor Prairie. This was a main trading route between the two. I've often said that was the I-69 of its day, because all of the trading went along that route. The Delaware planted their villages along this same route. The trail began here in Brookville, made its way north, split just above Newcastle, with the East Fork going over here to the Bakangahilas town, then to Anderson. The West Fork, a direct trail to Anderson, and then it followed the river all the way down to William Connor's settlement. Wapakamakoke. It was more like their homeland along the coastal plain of southern New Jersey and Delaware than any place the Delaware had lived since leaving the Delaware River Valley 100 years before. In all the moves they made in their long history, central Indiana most resembled their ancestral home on the Delaware. The name Wapakamakoke has three meanings in the Delaware language. It means white river, it means white grave, and it also means at a place where there is much white earth. They take that because of this picture that I took This is down along the White River today, back of the Shrine Club. I took my shoe and brushed away the leaves to show you the white earth. It's a white clay. The area is filled with that white clay. In fact, years ago at Mounds Amusement Park, when the canoe rides were available and the water was nice and clear, the people who rode in those canoes left chronicles of those visits there and talked how they could see clear through the water to the white bottom of the river. Wapakamakoke is of the dialect of the tribe that was here, east of here, up near Selma, Indiana, where White River has also been present. There were Delaware there, only they spoke a different dialect, and they gave the river a different name. Means the same, only in their dialect, the word is Wapahani. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the Wapahani school. That's where it takes its name. So the river had two names. Village site documentation for this program, I referred to the Moravian Missionary's Diary, 1801 to 1806. I referred to the Sons of Wilderness book by John and William Connor. I used the 1821 federal government surveys, and finally I used our own Madison County histories. I needed all four of those to pull this story together to give you a clear picture, and myself, of where these village sites were, who occupied them, and for what length of time. Number one on the list is the Wapakamakoke town. Most easterly village was called Wapakamakoke. The chief was Wapakamakoke. I've introduced you to him already. He's the one in the painting. He was the war chief of the tribe. It was located on the left bank of the White River, about 3 miles south of the city of Muncie in Delaware County. The village stood on a hill 100 feet above White River with a deep gully on the southwest and sloped southward 80 rods to a place there known as Juber Creek. Beyond this creek, about 40 rods, stood an Indian trading post. There were approximately 40 families living there at Wapakamakoke at one time. In the beginning, Wapakamakoke was the site of authority for all the Delaware residing in central Indiana. It was also the site of the torture or burning stake. Prisoners, both Indian and white, were brought there. The exact location of the stake has been preserved through the intervening years and can be located today by a large stone placed over the site. This is the site of the village of Wapakamakoke. This is the Burlington Road coming southeast out of Muncie. You see the White River. This property is all owned, or was all owned, by a lady who was a sister to the Ball brothers. We all know of the Ball brothers. They had a sister, and their sister owned this. I got onto the property by permission from that family to take the pictures that you're now going to see. That's me, if you don't recognize me. I'm standing on that flat stone. That flat stone is where the torture stake was. How the family knew that was that when they acquired the property, the stake was still there. Only it was charred, and over time it decayed and fell to the ground. But they knew what it was, and so they marked it with this stone. I'm standing on it. Believe you me, that was not easy to find, as you can look in the field there. This is part of the site today. Chief Kikthewenund came from the ranks to be head war chief of the Delaware. An early missionary mentioned him in his writings as having been at the Tuscarora River in Ohio as early as 1762, and 19 years after that he visited the Christian Indians in Ohio. He is described as a fearless, frank, and magnanimous. He was a friend to the British when they treated him to his liking, but after General Wayne's great victory, August the 20th, 1794, at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which was the final battle of the Northwest Indian War, he renounced all allegiance to the English and became a steadfast friend of the United States. He is well known for his warning to the Christian Indians at Kikthewenund. In 1781, Wapakamakoke realized the dangerous situation of the Christian Delaware Indians on the Muskegon, and caught as they were between the opposing British and American forces, and he urged them to move westward. He left a parting warning to the Moravian Indians that the Americans were a bad lot and not to be trusted. Incredible as it seemed at the time, it was only 6 months later that the massacre of Indians at Kikthewenund shocked the western country. The Delaware tribe never fully recovered from this blow. Their distrust of the white man lasted for years. It was always a source of great bitterness to their leaders. You see here a memorial placed by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1925. In 1925, the Daughters of the American Revolution became very active in central Indiana, placing historical markers all over central Indiana. This one's here at Muncie. We've got several in Anderson that they placed. The Moravian missionaries located near Andersonstown recorded in their diary for May 24th, 1805, the following entry, quote, "We heard that old Chief Wapakamakoke, of whom the Indians thought a great deal, has died." It's probable that the missionaries learned of Wapakamakoke's death within a few days of its occurrence, for visitors at the mission site on their way to or from Wapakamakoke were frequent. Site number 2, Tedpasketstown. The next village downriver was Tedpasketstown, or Muncie town. You notice the spelling of Muncie? That's a corruption of the third clan of the Delaware known as the Mincie, M-I-N-S-I. It is a corruption of the spelling of that. And today I would offer you that M-U-N-C-I-A is a corruption of that. It lay on the right bank of the river about 4 miles downstream from Wapakamakoke, within the present limits of the city of Muncie. It was a very small village with about 8 houses. The site is immediately north of the river, across from Muncie Central High School. In all probability, it was established at the same time as Wapakamakoke. Here you see Muncie Central High School in the parking lot, the White River, Minnetrista Center. Tedpasket's village was here. He was the tribal chief. Wapakamakoke was the war chief. When the Delaware at war, Wapakamakoke ran the tribe. When they were at peace, Tedpasket ran the tribe. A monument to Chief Tedpasket. He was the head chief who in 1768 endeavored to rehabilitate his tribe with some of its former greatness. Little has been written concerning him, but what has been written shows that he was wise in counsel, brave in battle, and always alert to promote the welfare of his people. In his later years, he was charged with being too friendly with the whites. He sometimes carried with him a string of 27 dried human tongues, which he proudly offered as a grim and mute testimony that he was not a weakling. He met a violent death on March 17, 1806, at the hands of his son and some accomplices on the plain below the mission site east of Andersonstown. I can take you to the site today. He was first struck in the head with a hatchet and then thrown half alive into a large fire. It took him, according to missionaries, it took him 24 hours to die. Wapakamakoke was located at the present-day Yorktown, where Buck Creek empties into White River. The missionaries located on the south side of the river and referred to it as Oanake. It was situated 9 miles below Muncie town and 8 miles upstream from the mission town. The village was small, and no estimate of the number of families residing there exists. This is a view of Yorktown. This is the White River. This is Buck Creek. Where they come together was where the village of Wapakamakoke was located. This is the water treatment plant at Yorktown today. Chief Wapakamakoke. There you see Buck Creek on the left, joining with the White River on the right. Wapakamakoke, who was the shaman or medicine man of the tribe, the Moravians referred to him as a great sorcerer. His name means hard walker in the Delaware language. He was a frequent visitor to the Moravian mission, although he rejected the idea of Christianity and he talked strongly against it. The missionaries often wrote of visiting his village many times and reported seeing Ted baskets there on several occasions. Hawking Pomska died in 1806, and from what I could find, it was reported that he died a drunkard. Battle of Mississinewa. Following the Battle of the Mississinewa, which would have been in December of 1812, the Delaware were instructed by Harrison, that would be General William Henry Harrison, to abandon their towns on the White River and move to the Shawnee settlement on the Auglaize River near Piqua, Ohio. Not long afterwards, they moved to the state of Ohio and placed themselves under the protection of the United States government. In June 1813, an expedition composed of 137 mounted men under the command of Colonel Joseph Bartholomew started toward the Delaware towns on the West Fork of the White River with the intention to surprise and punish some hostile Indians supposed to be lurking about those villages. In the process, the Delaware villages were burnt to the ground. What's going on here is that after the Battle of the Mississinewa, where the British and their Indian Confederation were defeated by the Americans, there were dissident Indians in the area, and General William Henry Harrison decided we needed to get them out. One way to get them out, of course, is to kill them, but the other way is to starve them. And so the foodstuffs that were stored in the Indian villages, he sent this cavalry in from Kentucky, Bartholomew's group, and they burned all the Indian villages along the White River and the foodstuffs that would supply the dissident Indians. They left the area, so the mission was successful. Sometime after the War of 1812, the Delaware began to move back to the White River. It appears, and I guess I need to explain to you why he chose to relocate the Delaware. It's because the Delaware had been asked, Chief Anderson had been asked in 1811 by Tecumseh at Anderson, when he met with him there. Tecumseh wanted Chief Anderson to supply his warriors to help with their confederation to overthrow the white man. Chief Anderson said, no, I'm not going to do that. He had witnessed the power of the United States government at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in Ohio in 1794. He wanted nothing to do with war. So he told Tecumseh, I'm not doing that. That word got to General Harrison, and as a reward by General Harrison, he moved the Delaware to the reservation at Piqua, Ohio, for them to live in peace without any being bothered by anyone until the War of 1812 was over, and then he allowed them to return. Two new villages were established during this time in what is today Madison County. Village number 4, Buckstown. The first of the new villages was called Kilbuckstown or Buckstown. It was located on a high bluff east of the river, approximately 1 mile northwest of Chesterfield. The property on which it was located was once the home of Carl Bronnenberg, whose home still stands near the intersection of County Road 75 North and 300 East. An aerial view. This is Timberline Campground, northwest of Chesterfield. This is the road coming out of Chesterfield, crossing White River, and goes over and gets and ties into Emerald Glen. The village was located here on this bend in the river and encompassed the property that was owned later by Carol Bronnenberg. And this is his home. The village associated with the Delaware Indian known as Captain Kilbuck was also known as Charles Henry Kilbuck. The county histories document that Captain White Eyes, also called Apachacon, lived within what are now the limits of Madison County. Now I need to explain something to you. I'm not sure how to pronounce these names. And if I butcher them up, I apologize to the Delaware who are watching this. Kilbuck, his Indian name was Gentleman, but he took the name Charles Henry Kilbuck because his father had been saved by a man by the name of Kilbuck during the Revolutionary War. And to honor the man who saved him, he took his name and then gave the name to his son. They record that his lodge was situated on the southeast bank of White River on land later owned by the county and used as a poor farm. And there his village was situated also, but it was vacated by him soon after the Treaty of 1818. The county poor farm, before or after it was the county poor farm, became the Anderson Airport. Both Kilbuck and Whiteye signed the treaty at St. Mary's in 1818. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Each remained here until 1821 when they both moved to Fairfield, Ontario, Canada, and joined with other Moravian Indians who first settled there in May of 1792 when they established the mission at the town of Fairfield. Now you're probably confused because we're talking about Delaware and then all of a sudden I talk about Moravian Indians. Moravian Indians were Indians, Delaware, who had been converted to Christianity by the Moravian missionaries, and they were then known as Moravian Indians. Little Muncie town. Originally it was the site of the Moravian mission station. It was located on the right bank of White River in the southeast quarter of Section 17, Township 19 North, Range 8 East in Anderson Township. It was 3 miles east of Anderson's Town, 8 miles downstream from Wapakamakoke Town, and 20 miles downstream from Wapakamakoke. The mission station and Indian village were situated upon a high point overlooking the country for a distance of 2 or 3 miles to the south. Aerial view. This is Scatterfield Road in Anderson. This is the old mobile home park east of Anderson. This is Panorama Heights, thank you. And this is the site of the mission station. The village is a direct result of the presence of the Moravian missionaries. The Indians that were able to convert to Christianity were encouraged to live at the mission station, which they did. Many of them lived in what were called wigwams. Now, you don't play basketball in that wigwam. Many of them built permanent log homes as well, but many lived in wigwams. The converts would erect huts on the site and live there, practicing their new religion. After the missionaries left in September of 1806, the village continued to exist. My picture here is of that site. It's at the base of the cul-de-sac on Linwood Drive in Anderson. This was the site of the Moravian mission, and if you're back here in December, I'll tell you that whole story. Evidence of still remain where the area was surveyed in 1821 as a house supposed to have been erected for a fort was still standing and well preserved when the survey was conducted. The evidence of the location of their lodges and wigwams were very easily traced with the advent of the white settlers into this region. Number 6, Anderson's Town. The Delaware called it Wapakamakoke, which means chestnut tree place. It was located on the left bank of White River on the present site of Anderson. The town originally contained 15 or so families when it was first settled in 1798. But in 1818, it was estimated that there were about 800 Delaware Indians living in this area, and about half of them lived in Anderson's Town. About 1819 or 1820, a few pioneers arrived here and they found quite a remnant of the tribe living there. Some said as many as 1,000 lived where the city of Anderson is today. After the Delaware departed, the settlers called their new home Anderson Town. Overview of Anderson, East Side, White River, Park Place, Athletic Park. The Delaware Village would have extended from the White River to about where Madison County Courthouse is located, and from St. Mary's Church up to where the jail is located. That would have been the area of the site, roughly 30 acres in size. A lithograph that I have dated 1871 shows what the topography of the land was like at that time. Instead of the way it is today, Anderson was situated on bluffs, 76 feet above the river. That all has been graded down now for streets and so forth, but that's where the village was. Most of the village was on the top, Some was down in this area. They stayed away from the lower area because of the flooding of the White River. At its largest size, the village was spread over an area that today would include St. Mary's Church on the south to the Madison County Jail on the north. I'm standing in the parking lot of St. Mary's Church, and I'm looking across at the Madison County Jail. This would have been the area of the village. The river was its eastern boundary with possibly some habitation on the east side of the river. Its western boundary would have included the area where the Madison County Courthouse now stands. Altogether, this area encompassed approximately 30 acres. Located at or near St. Mary's Church was the Longhouse. It was used for council meetings and social gatherings. I'm reminded of a story. St. Mary's School is now called Holy Cross School. There are first, second, and third graders there. Fourth grade too, I believe. I've been invited several times to go and speak to the children in class. And one time I struck upon an idea that I wanted to tell them about the village, the Indian village. So I asked the teacher to step over to the window. And I said, tell us what you see. Well, she says, I see St. Mary's Church, and I see this, and I see that, and da-da-da. Okay. I asked a couple of kids. I said, step up here, tell me what you see. They basically said the same thing. I said, you know what I want to see? You know what I see? I see an Indian village. I see fires burning over kettles. I see a longhouse here where that church is standing. People coming and going. Pretty soon all the kids came up. It was a great way to teach. John Connor recorded visiting the one in Kikthewenund's village. He actually came here one time, dressed as a Delaware, sat in the back of the room for a long time, arms folded. Finally, Chief Anderson spotted him, realized who he was, and they all had a hearty laugh over it. We know the Indians maintained a large field in the rich bottomlands, later known as the Hazlitt Farm, here, which was the area on the south side of the river between what is today Madison Avenue and Broadway. The area was approximately 1/2 mile in length and 1/2 mile in width. The land was cultivated for a number of years by Indian squaws and was planted in corn. After the Delaware left, Colonel Nineveh Berry recalled the appearance of the site. There was only one road, he said, running east and west, and a few Indian trails running south and north. There were a few unoccupied Indian cabins and the Indian graveyard with numerous wooded crosses over the graves extending along the bluff of the river. The Indian burial ground was located on the ground now occupied by the Anderson City building and extended from as far north as the Martin Grunwald home and on to the east to the bluff overlooking the river. Something that you should know is the wooded crosses that they described, they were not the Christian cross. They are the Roman cross. They were made of wood. The idea, the belief in the Delaware tribe is this, that is when those wooden cross would deteriorate and collapse, that released the spirit. That's Nineveh Berry. He once lived in a house which was abandoned by Chief Anderson in September of 1821. Berry first arrived in the area March 4th, 1821 at the age of 17 and knew it was Anderson's lodge, thus establishing the location for us. It was his mother and father, John and Sally, who donated the site in 1827 to Madison County for the purpose of establishing Andersontown as the county seat. Chief Anderson's lodge was located on what is today the southeast corner of 8th Street and Central Avenue, immediately south of where the Madison County Jail now stands. One account says his residence was a 2-story double cabin, and one side of which was occupied by him and his family, and the other by his son. Never names that son, but I would suspect that it was his oldest son who was Sarcoxy. Remember that name. Picture today of the site of Chief Anderson's house was located. It was here. This was all torn down at the construction of the Eisenhower Bridge. But we have this old picture of the #1 fire station. That's Chief Anderson's house. That's Chief Anderson's house. It had been sited There wasn't a Steve Jackson around at that time to prevent them from tearing the house down, and so it got torn down. Survey field notes mention a road intersecting the east line of section 13, which is immediately south of the town site, and 62 change, which is approximately 4/5 of a mile north of the southeast section corner. Don't worry about what I just told you, I'll show it to you. What we're talking about is we're back to this Connor Road. One fork went to Muncie, one fork went to Anderson. This is the fork that we're talking about here. Today, Cincinnati Avenue closely follows what I term the West Fork of the Connor Trail as it entered Anderson's town. There were actually two trails, or two forks of the same trail that came together to Anderson's town. The intersection of Wheeler and Cincinnati Avenues. This is Cincinnati Avenue, this is Wheeler Avenue. Probably the most important intersection in Indiana at the time, the busiest intersection. The Connor Trail began at John Connor's trading post southeast of Brookville. It ran north through Connorsville and then followed a northerly direction passing Newcastle to the east where it split into two forks. The West Fork turned slightly northwest until it reached Anderson's town. Here it was joined what was called the Indian Road, or what I term the East Fork of the Connor Trail. The Connor Trail then entered Anderson town at the southeast side. The trail exited the village by today's 8th Street and continued west to Strawtown, where it turned south following White River to William Connor's trading post. Chief Kikthewenund. William Anderson was born in the colony of Pennsylvania sometime in the mid-1750s. He became tribal chief in the spring of 1806, a position he held until his death in 1831 in the Kansas Territory. Village number 7, Greenstown. The next village was small and not found in the survey, but its existence was recorded in the county histories, where they tell of its location, but more importantly, the chief. It was known as Greenstown, and it was located on what today is West 10th Street between John Street and Madison Avenue. Here I have an aerial view for you. You know the area today as Mays Park in Anderson, but that was the site of Captain Green's village. The site today is owned by the city and is known as Mays Park. At one time, a stream of water meandered through the village site in the western part of town and was named Green's Branch after the chief, whose wigwam stood on the grounds. Today, if you take 10th Street through Mays Park, you'll come to a dip. That dip is where the stream was located. It is now still there, it's still there, but it's buried beneath the street in a pipe that takes it out to White River. I believe this village was established after the Delaware returned from Ohio. Captain John Green, his description that I found of him was he was tall and well-proportioned, weighing about 240 pounds. Now, they didn't have scales then, so I don't know how they weighed him, but that's what it said. Although he was of French extraction, his Indian characteristics strongly distinguished him. One author speaks of hearing of an Indian whose English name was Green say he had killed enough white people for himself and his pony to swim in their blood. If one followed the northwesterly course of Green's Branch for approximately 5/8 of a mile from Captain Green's village, it would bring you to the only known site of a torture or burning stake located in Madison County. The site was just back of a gravel pit once owned by Peter Blevins, and the pit was immediately north of the site of what later became the famous 1 Mile House, a log cabin built in 1839. I have an article in the current issue of Madison Magazine about the 1 Mile House. This is that site today, and the torture stake was behind that. It's the only one in Madison County. Number 8, Nancytown. Nancytown is mentioned in the Journal of Thomas Dean, who visited the area in 1817 and placed it about 9 miles west of Anderson. The Moravian missionaries who recorded an entry in their diary dated June 1, 1805, quote, "The Nanticokes lived 20 miles down the river." I believe the 1805 location mentioned by them was at a point where County Road 800 West would cross White River. This area was known as the McClintock neighborhood and named for a family of the late 1800 farmers. The Dean Journal and Moravian Diary establish a time period for the village from 1805 to 1817. However, I think it's very likely that the village existed before 1805, as the Nanticoke migrated here at the same time as the Delaware and were subject to the same terms of the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. That marriage between the Nanticoke and the Delaware continues today. They have always been positioned beside each other all throughout history, and today in Oklahoma they are still together. Again, a lot of intermarrying between the Nanticoke and the Delaware. The early writers of Madison County history further support the location of the site. John Faulkner and Byron Dyson made mention of the site in their 1897 history. Quote, fronting the beautiful eminence upon the north bank of White River, some 8 miles west of Anderson, is an old Indian burying ground which occupies nearly an acre, and from the depressions in the ground it is surmised that 100 or more Indians are buried there. This ground is part of the farm of Alexander McClintock, close quote. But is there a clue to the location of Nancytown? John Faulkner provides a key piece of information in his 1914 county history, where he writes, quote, in what is known as the McClintock neighborhood near the site of an old Indian village and burial ground was once a little hamlet called Nancytown, but it is now extinct and the ground where it stood is used for farming purposes, close quote. I believe this statement supports my theory that Nancytown was located on the old Strawtown Road, which is today 8th Street Road, very close to County Road 800 West. I believe the Daniel Wise home, built in 1853, now occupies the site of Nancytown. This is an aerial view of Nancytown, what I believe is Nancytown. This is 8th Street Road, County Road 800 West. This is the McClintock property. And this home here is the Daniel Wise home. And I am strong belief that that is Nancytown. You probably recognize that home if you've ever gone out West 8th Street. Gone past the intersection of 8th Street Road and 800 West. That home is there. That is the site of Nancytown, and that's the Daniel Wise house, built in 1853. Number 9 on our list is our town. If one follows 8th Street West, you will come to Layton Road or County Road 400 West. Layton Road dead ends at 8th Street, but if you continue north to the river, it would come to the site of a village of Nanticokes. This, I believe, was their second location, and it was called Our Town. Why it was called this, I do not know. Faulkner and Dyson also helped locate the second site when they recorded that Nanticoke was the name of a chief whose village was located on the south bank of White River on the present farm of Robert Cather, about 4 miles west of Anderson. The records show this farm immediately west of County Road 400 West. The site was 4 miles overland northwest of Andersontown and the last of the Indian towns shown on the government survey made by Bentley in 1821. There's where he placed it. I won't read you the coordinates. Our town is no doubt the one mentioned in Bentley's survey of 1821. The early historians all refer to it by its name. Another aerial view, West 8th Street Road, Layton Road, White River. Our town would have been in this area here. Chief James Nanticoke. In 1914, Faulkner wrote, quote, his village was situated not far from Anderson and bore the name of Our Town, which was conferred upon it by Nanticoke's squaw, who is said to have been a very beautiful woman, at one time maintained a relation of chiefess to her tribe. Isaac McCoy, in his History of Baptist Indian Missions, wrote that while making a tour of the towns on White River in 1818, his party reached the village on December 5th, quote, procured a little corn for our horses, and dined at the house of an elderly couple, the wife being a woman of note named Nancy, who could speak English tolerably well, and who was the principal manager of matters around her, period. In other words, she wore the pants. It appears the Our Town site was occupied from roughly 1818 to 1821. Number 10 on our list, Indian Strawtown. The next village is in Hamilton County. It was called Indian Strawtown. The village was located 9 miles west of Nancytown on the north bank of White River. The survey places the site a little over 1.5 miles east and north of the present Strawtown, on the right bank of the river. Again, an aerial view of the area. You see Strawtown here. Would have been in this area here. I went out here and took a picture, and that's kind of what it looks like today. In 1821, Deputy Surveyor Thomas Brown described the site as situated on a beautiful eminence which overlooks a fine prairie on the opposite side of the river. The area was possibly named after a native Delaware chief named Straw or Straw Bridge. Number 11, Sarahtown. Evidence of habitation has been discovered in Hamilton County on the left bank of White River, about 1 mile south and west of the present Strawtown. It seems logical to assume that this is the site of Sarahtown, referred to by the Moravian missionary Luckenbach as the last of the small Indian villages below Anderson's Town. Again, I refer you to Strawtown on its way to Cicero, White River, and Sarahstown would have been on this bend in the river. It was so named because Isaac and Sarah, two baptized Indians, in other words, you notice they have English names, they've been baptized, had settled there with their sons who had become heathen. Well, you're either a convert or you're heathen in the Delaware. The parents were dead and the sons would not leave their heathenism, referred to as one of the 3 largest Delaware towns on White River, the other 2 being Wapakamakoke and Anderson's Town. It was a big town. Number 12, the Upper Delaware Town. Located just south of present-day Noblesville, it was used frequently during the War of 1812 and thereafter to designate an Indian village in Hamilton County in the vicinity of William Connor's trading post, about 7 miles downstream from Sarahtown. It was on the west bank of the White River and opposite the mouth of Stony Creek. An aerial view. This is Allisonville Road, White River, and this is Stony Creek as it flows into White River. The village would have been here. I took that picture. I went over there to take a picture of the village, and I saw all that deep snow, and I just stood on the road and took my picture. The Upper Delaware Town is not mentioned by the missionaries. Either it was not settled by 1806, which is when they left, or it lay outside their field of work. I don't know which it is. On November 30th, 1801, a license was granted to John and William Connor to trade with the Delaware at their town of, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that. In 1802, William Connor established his post on Connor's Prairie. It's possible that the Upper Delaware Town was called, and there's another name I won't try, at this time. Connor's Town is number 13. It was about 3 miles south of the Upper Delaware Town. It was the site of William Connor's trading post, established in 1802, and was on the east bank of the White River. An aerial view of Connor Prairie, the house being here and this being where the symphony plays, the river, and out here in this area somewhere would have been village number 13, Connorstown. The William Connor home. There were 3 unnamed villages along the west bank of White River and one just north of the post on the east bank. 3 of the sites are in Hamilton County, and the southernmost location is just inside Marion County. To illustrate what I've just said, Hamilton County with their 3, and this lone village here called Lower Delaware Town inside of Marion County. And now we're at Lower Delaware Town. It was about 12 miles north of Indianapolis in what is today Marion County and located on the east bank of White River. It was a small village, and the leader was known as the Owl, and settlers referred to it as the Old Village. These were the southernmost of the Delaware along White River. So they stretched from Muncie to Indianapolis. This is White River as it flows through Broad Ripple. The village would have been here in Broad Ripple. 14 towns and 8 chiefs. No doubt there were more villages and chiefs in this area for the approximate 26 years they lived here. The Moravian missionaries indicated there were 11 Delaware towns on the White River in 1801 and 9 in 1802. In other words, not all of those 14 villages were here all the time. According to the June 3rd, 1801 entry in the diary of the Little Indian congregation on the White River, there were down the river from the mission station 7 Indian towns of different nations, most of them Delaware towns, and upriver 4 Indian towns, also of various nations. They also wrote of a Miami camp 3 miles from their mission station. One only has to look at the multitude of Indians who assembled at the west bank of the St. Mary's River in Ohio in the year 1818 to realize just how many Indians were scattered throughout Indiana and Ohio. The whites were outnumbered in the council by more than 3 to 1. Besides the 3 United States commissioners, Lewis Cass, Jonathan Jennings, and Benjamin Park, there were present 22 others, including John and William Connor, who signed one or another of the treaties as witnesses for the United States. This is a new purchase boundary, or the Treaty of St. Mary's on a highway in Indiana. The Treaty of St. Mary's, also called the New Purchase, was signed October 3rd, 1818 by Captain Anderson. And then there's other names there, and I'm not going to try to pronounce all of them. Some are in English and some are the other, but those are the Delaware. These 18 Delaware were joined in signing by the Potawatomi, who had 34 chiefs and warriors present. The We had 7 and the Miami had 16. Besides these Indian participants, there were also present chief men from the Wyandot, Seneca, Shawnee, and Ottawa tribes, which had just concluded treaties for the other lands. In other words, this Treaty of St. Mary's in 1818 was enormous, not only in its size, but its impact. Indiana had become a state 2 years earlier in 1816, and they were wanting to settle Indiana, and so this was the means by which they got the Indians out of Indiana. The Delaware existence in Indiana was sandwiched between 2 very important treaties. One brought them here, and the other drove them away. The Treaty of St. Mary's promised to provide the Delaware with suitable lands beyond the Mississippi in exchange for lands they were vacating, and to reimburse them in full for whatever improvements they had made on the lands they had occupied along the White River. The government also agreed to give them a perpetual annuity of $4,000 in silver coin. Every year, they were given an annuity of $4,000 to be spent for the welfare of the tribe. Sadly, it was not spent for the welfare of the tribe. It was spent mainly on whiskey. The United States allowed the Delaware 3 years in which to prepare for their removal from Indiana and Pickwell, Ohio. Chief Anderson used the full 3-year period to leave. He and the others left behind a land they had lived in for approximately 26 years to go to a country filled with unknowns, but they would adapt and persevere, for that was their strength. They'd lived for a while in southwest Missouri and then in Kansas, near Kansas City. Today, the main group resides near Bartlesville, Oklahoma. This shows you graphically the movement of the Delaware once they left the East Coast. Some went to Canada, some up to Wisconsin. This main group came here to Bartlesville. There is a second group here. I talked to the Delaware a number of years ago when they were in Anderson for their powwow. And I said, what about that second group? Do you associate with them at all? And these were chiefs. They said, no, we have no contact with them at all. I said, how many are there? They said, well, we think there's about 2,000. There's roughly 12,000 of us and roughly 2,000 of them, but there's no contact between us. We have no interaction. I've been able to enjoy the knowing some of the Delaware. That's me. The date is August the 28th, 2015. The man that I'm shaking hands with is Curtis Anderson. He is a 3 great-grandson of Chief Anderson. He is the only one of 10 Anderson children, 3 natural, 7 by marriage, who carry the surname Anderson. Only one. Got to know him quite well. He passed away several years ago. I was asked by the Delaware to write a eulogy for his funeral, which I did, and I sent it. And I don't know, but I understand it was read at his funeral. This gorgeous picture, I have met and know these people. This is Michael Pace, who was positioned at Conner Prairie for years as the interpreter of the Delaware tribe there at Conner Prairie. His wife, Ella, third great-grandson of Chief Anderson. Don Second Dine, also a third great-grandson of Chief Anderson. D. Ketchum, also a third great-grandson of Chief Anderson. And Dee's wife, Annette. Annette is a descendant, she told me, of Chief Anderson's oldest son, Sir Coxey. I ask you to remember that name. She wrote to me a couple of weeks ago, Annette did. She's interested in the genealogy of her family. Today she's 85 years old. I would liken her this way. As Queen Elizabeth was to England, Annette Ketchum is to the Delaware nation, the Queen Mother, if you will. They don't know, she doesn't, and most of them don't know their genealogy. I know some of it, so she wrote to me. We corresponded back and forth a couple of times. She was very complimentary. She has seen, Chet, she has seen these videos that you did of when I did the life of Chief William Anderson. She saw that in Oklahoma. That's how far-reaching what you guys are doing, how important that is. At the conclusion of her last email to me, just before her name, that was what she said. Well, not knowing Delaware, I broke it down. La Peach Canoe. The Delaware put the accent on the first syllable most of the time. I think it's a beautiful expression. What she said to me was, by saying that, I will see you again. I thought that was pretty neat. And now the final slide tonight. That's pronounced Wanishi. And I'd like for you to say it 3 times. Ready? Wanishi, Wanishi, Wanishi. My response, you're welcome. You just told me thank you in the Delaware language. Yeah.